Let me tell you what if Saudi Arabia had stood by Palestine.
The Arab world is outraged. Arab states also helped to defend Israel when Iran attacked.
To the surprise of many, that was.
A Muslim Arab nation took up arms to defend Israel.
50,523. According to the official statement, the number of deaths in Palestine has crossed 50,000 in the past 1.5 years. However, the real number could be much higher, possibly over 61,000. Since the resumption of Israeli attacks on Gaza after the ceasefire was broken on March 18, more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed. Every day, a new chapter of destruction is written in blood on the soil of Palestine. In the face of Israel's genocide-like crimes, where Western countries, including the United States, stand alongside Israel, the major Arab nations' silence and lack of support for the oppressed Palestinians is conspicuous. The entire Muslim Ummah is supposed to be a single body, and yet Saudi Arabia, the nation from which the history of the Muslim Ummah began, remains entirely silent. These leaders, who were supposed to be the champions of the entire Muslim world, who should have pounced on the enemy like a lion at any aggression against any Muslim country, are now hiding behind their enemies like cowards. How could the Muslim countries have supported Palestine? The silence of Muslim nations in the ongoing conflict in Palestine has raised eyebrows not only among Muslim communities but also within non-Muslim countries. The extent of fragmentation within the Muslim world has become glaringly evident in this crisis. Something that might have gone unnoticed without this war. Had these countries united in support of Palestine, the entire geopolitical condition or the equations could have changed dramatically. If the world were compared to a vehicle, the question arises, what is needed to keep it running? The answer is fuel. For nations to sustain their economies and military power, oil remains an indispensable resource. From cars and trucks to cargo ships and jet planes, without oil, the world's infrastructure would grind to a halt. Throughout history, countless political power struggles, regime changes and wars have been centered around this very weapon, oil. The organization that controls the largest share of global oil reserves is OPEC. Comprising 13 nations from the Middle East and Africa, OPEC manages approximately 42% of the world's oil reserves. Among its members, Saudi Arabia holds the greatest influence, given that it is the second largest oil producer globally. In 2022 alone, Saudi Arabia produced more than 12 million barrels of oil per day. The kingdom also controls 17% of the world's oil reserves and is the leading exporter of oil. It's therefore very evident that the balance of power in global energy resources lies predominantly in Saudi Arabia's hand. And now, therefore, the question comes up to be solved. Could have Saudi Arabia shifted the Gaza conflict's trajectory by using oil as a weapon? Saudi Arabia, or rather any OPEC nation, could have turned the tide of the Gaza conflict by leveraging its control over oil and playing what is often termed oil warfare. In fact, had OPEC collectively imposed an oil embargo on United States and Israel, the US could have thought twice before supporting Israel. This is because 7% of America's petroleum and 7% of its crude oil imports come from Saudi Arabia. Furthermore, 16% of America's total oil imports come from OPEC nations. This equates to nearly 1 million barrels of oil daily from OPEC member countries, with Saudi Arabia alone supplying 550,000 barrels. An oil embargo is not a pretty new concept. Let me tell you a story. In 1973, during the Arab-Israeli War, Arab nations imposed an oil embargo not only on the US and Israel, but also on the countries supporting Israel, including Netherlands, Portugal, and South Africa. The embargo had significant impact on the US economy at that time, causing the price of oil to quadruple. Even in response, fuel rationing and speed limit were introduced. The situation became so dire that US President Richard Nixon even considered seizing Saudi, Kuwait and Abu Dhabi oil fields. Ultimately, negotiations in 1974 led to a resolution. This history highlights a very crucial point. When traditional diplomatic channels such as the United Nations or international courts fail to deter the actions of nations like the US or Israel, an oil embargo could have been the game changer in this conflict. and that's for 110% sure. So far, we have discussed oil. Now, let's turn our attention to military power. One of the greatest fears of many nations when it comes to opposing Israel is the prospect of facing military retaliation. This fear is grounded in brutal responses that Lebanon and Yemen have experienced in recent years. In both cases, the Western world has unleashed severe attacks on those nations following the actions of Hezbollah in Lebanon and Houthis in Yemen. The question arises, why can't there be a united, coordinated resistance instead of fragmented and isolated attacks? The answer is clear. Such a unified defense is indeed very possible. To safeguard the rights of Muslims, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) was established in 1979, comprising 57 member countries. Among these, nations like Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, Iran, and Algeria possess military capabilities that could rival those of United States. Turkey, for instance, ranks 8th in the global military strength, followed by Indonesia at 13th, Saudi Arabia at 23rd, and Pakistan at 9th. If these nations were to combine their military forces, effectively stopping the war in Palestine would have been an impossible feat. Amidst tariff disputes and losing trusts among the allied nations like Europe and Canada, the United States would have thought long and hard before exacerbating its relations with Arab nations over the Israel issue. I understand there could have been many other complexities behind Saudi's silence, or perhaps the silence of the whole Muslim world. There could be reasons like Iran, a Shia country that most Muslim countries, especially Saudi, opposes. There could be problems like personal self-interest. Yes, I understand. There could be complexities regarding security, but dear Muslim world, your silence is not silence anymore, at least in this point, both really and metaphorically. There are allegations that a government defense entity in the United Arab Emirates invested $10 million in January 2025 in an Israeli weapons manufacturing company, Third Eye Systems, further strengthening Israel's military industry. How ridiculous and shameful act that can be. In real, each Arab nation has become dependent on the United States and Israel for its trade, business, and weapon. In order to safeguard their own interests, many have chosen to remain allied with America and Israel, turning a blind eye to the realities of the situation. However, China, Russia, and Turkey could have been chosen as easy alternatives, or the 57 OIC countries, if they wished, they could have created their own very alternatives. Muslim countries are now calculating whether their actions could be beneficial for them in the long run. Some are afraid of losing power, others fear the consequences of war, some wish to expand their influence, and others are silently sitting in the corner, too afraid to speak out. Meanwhile, Western nations continue to unite and wave the flag of false humanity, standing on the bodies of innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Shame, shame, and shame. Remember, if Gaza is destroyed, it will be a defeat for the entire Muslim world. No treaty, no resources, and no power will allow this nation to rise again. Leaders who silence public protests in the name of power must be discarded. It's time to protest, to resist from every angle and every possible avenue. This is no longer just a religious war. It's a battle for the rights of all oppressed people. The people of Gaza represent the entire suffering world, and if they are not supported today, tomorrow it could be me, you, and any of us to become the next victim. Keep speaking, fellas. Keep shouting from river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Save humanity. Save Palestine.